Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a great episode in store for you. Our 5 biggest lessons learned or mistakes to be mindful of from some recent guest podcasts and some personal life experiences. So we're going to talk about a few of the golden nugget takeaways we've had and elaborate on them because I think we touched on these points in some recent podcasts, but they deserve a little bit more time and attention. So we're going to talk about rest periods in hypertrophy, nutrient density, glute bridges being functional, the stress dilemma, and self-talk in sports. So we're going to get into the details, obviously, in the episode, but hopefully you'll come away with some really practical, useful takeaways from this episode. But before we get into it, don't forget to click the link in the description box below to get your 14-day free trial to Rob's Strength Formula program, which is your answer to the strength and muscle building equation. Also, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website to get your free guide to movement mechanics. Also, new this week, or as of last week, we have a new sponsor, ZAAG Supplements. Believe it or not, we actually do get a few offers for sponsorship, but we don't go for them because they're not products that we personally use, endorse, or believe in. But ZAAG is the exact opposite of that. ZAAG is a liquid gel shot containing 29 of the best vitamins, nootropics, and adaptogens designed to boost your body's ability to resist and adapt to stress. Being liquid, it's absorbed much better and faster than pills. And many people have seen objective improvements in their wearable data in just a few days. And both Rob and I have been using it for a little while now and have felt significant improvements in our concentration, our focus, energy levels, which have benefited our work, training, and overall mood. So we personally really recommend it as well. And Adam, the founder, has very generously offered an exclusive Lunge and Lift offer, which you won't find anywhere else. And it's a time or limited supply offer only for the first 25 listeners. So you will get 50% off a 2-week trial pack if you use our discount code DISCLIFT50, which is DISCLIFT50. If you miss the boat on that one, we've got a backup offer for you, which is DISCLIFT20, DISCLIFT20. And you can use those coupons at zaagsupplements.com. And ZAAG is spelled ZAAG. So please check them out. Right. That's done. Let's get into it, Rob.
Yes, mate. How's Bali?
Bali is brilliant. Thank you, mate. Yeah, it is. It's almost like a practical joke. Everything's just so good and so cheap. So yeah, I'm having a great time. Thanks.
Nice. I mean, it's it's cool. It's cool to see half the fitness industry going out there and doing their thing out there. So fair enough, and I'm glad you're part of it and you're enjoying it. I mean, when we see some of the stuff that's coming up today, I'm just going to drive straight into the episode. Episode with Casper, I loved that. I felt there was so much for me that I took away from that I see there's a lot of similarities in how I program for people, what I do, things that I believe in, and then also stuff that I'd never really thought of. And the under resting part is probably the biggest part that I took away, and I know you did as well, because I've often said, like, resting for, say, a few extra minutes in between sets or even between sides and something like that, I thought, I'm just being lazy. I need to keep the intensity high. I need to keep moving. And then having Casper kind of come at it from the other angle, say, no, that actually resting and getting more from those exercises might actually then mean you don't actually need to do as many exercises, because then the quality of the execution of your accessories is higher and you'll get more out of them. So that was probably a massive takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point as well. And when he said it, it was a bit of a light bulb penny drop moment for me, in that I think the tendency with hypertrophy work is to, like you say, keep the intensity high. But I think we too often think of intensity just as work done in a given period of time. We don't necessarily think about the intensity per rep, and actually doing more work in less time means we obviously can't go as heavy because we're just tired from doing more work in less time. And to get that maximum mechanical tension through the muscle, you do need to rest more. And I think the elaboration we wanted to do on this point was something we talked about in a really old episode about hypertrophy, which is the distinction between myofibrillar hypertrophy and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And myofibrillar is basically building more stronger muscle fibers themselves and building more motor units. So you're improving the contractile capacity of a muscle, which is slower, but is much more associated with strength benefits as well as size. Whereas sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is more around the cell volume, and this is more about basically getting fluid into cells and getting a pump and having swollen muscles, so you can look bigger faster, but you don't have so much of an associated strength benefit as well. And when you're doing the low rest, more pump style sets, you're pushing more towards a sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and you're not going to be able to get as much myofibrillar hypertrophy. And it depends what sort of look you're going for if you're training for aesthetics. But I think you can see this in bodybuilders who are legitimately very strong. They have a better muscle quality. The muscles are generally denser and would probably feel firmer to touch than somebody who's just like pumped up a balloon and has a huge bicep pump, for example, which would deflate at some point when they've lost the pump. Does that tie in with your experience in hypertrophy and strength training, Rob?
Yeah, and I think a really the feeling there you said about that density, and it's a difference between like waking up and feeling jacked and waking up and feeling flat. Like, yes, you can obviously have less carbohydrates in your body and stuff like that, but the waking up and feeling like, say, jacked is different, because you're just like, I feel good. But when you got a pump, it is so much better because you feel massive. But it's that short term gratification, right? It's the, I look really good right now, please take a photo of this double bicep pose, compared to waking up being about like 85% being like, yeah, I look good. I could be better, but I look good. And I definitely feel this is when you look at a lot of like natural bodybuilders that, you know, haven't gone into like a massive off season where they've put on loads of weight and they've just kept that dense look. You look at someone like Alberto Nunes, like he's like, if you look at, he's a lifetime natural bodybuilder, and like the density in his muscle, as you can tell, he used to do some powerlifting as well. So he's strong, he's jacked, and he just always looks jacked. So for myself, I do notice the difference, because when I'm looking at performing exercises in a shorter durations, you know, just chasing that pump, you are using less load. You just are. And it's like, but I've always justified it to myself as that's fine, because I'm chasing the pump. I'm chasing that breakdown in a more less stressful way, in a way, because I'm using less. So it's in a way, it's like an easy escape, even though it's not easy. Like getting that pump is hard, and it hurts. But like when you then do have heavier loads, and like recently I've been like going for like some heavy RDLs, so like going for like sets at 8 on like, say, an RDL with a bit of a stricter tempo, needing a bigger rest because I'm going pretty heavy, because I am trying to grow my glutes and hamstrings there. So it's like, rather than doing some like lighter reps and keeping that rest shorter, it's just a different experience. And I've really enjoyed taking some of the principles that I took from the episode into my own training now, and seeing how they've felt, because I have felt just strong in my accessories.
Yeah, I think if the listeners were to put this into play, rather than looking at like 60 seconds to 2 minutes sort of rest periods, three minutes north, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, which might feel like an eternity, especially for the CrossFitters. But you will, well, if you're tracking your workouts, you should notice either less of a drop off in performance throughout your sets, or that you're actually able to go heavier towards the later sets because you have recovered metabolically. So you might actually feel that you've got a better mind muscle connection, or you've got you've developed more efficiency in the movement through the practice of the earlier sets, and you can actually drive more mechanical tension through those muscles from the same number of sets and reps. And if you're like, I think a lot of people are probably thinking, I haven't got time to rest 5 minutes between sets. Casper's recommendation was basically to do something non-interfering in your rest periods. So you still feel like you're getting some productive work done, but it doesn't take away from the intensity of those main working sets. So, classic things like doing a lower body mobility or movement mechanics piece whilst you're doing upper body heavy lifting, and vice versa. It's a good way to use time. Or you could even do some in air quotes actual training or something else. But I think be aware that if you're applying intensity in two movements, you will also tire the system. So just be conscious of that. But yeah, I've been implementing this as well, just putting longer rest periods between my main working sets, and I've definitely felt I'm able to squeeze a little bit more productive work out of the same number of sets, which is not that surprising, but I think long term I'm definitely going to see a benefit from it.
I think it's because you're going against a narrative, right? Of like you expect your performance to taper off. You expect it to kind of go from 10 reps to 8 reps and maybe 7 reps in the last set. If you're going for like a 6 to 10 rep range, like you're expecting that. But I think if we get rid of that expectation and say, I want 10s on everything and I'm going to rest as I need to get those 10 reps, is that better? Or because technically we've done more reps, heavy, so then more weight going through that muscle, or is it better because we've taken a muscle closer to failure? That is then the goal. So it's for me, the way I've kind of implemented this is at the start of the week, I've put my like accessories where I want the bigger rest periods and stuff like that in, and at the back end of the week, I have my more cycloplasmic, more bodybuilding, pump chasing, like accessory pieces, because I think it is important to have both. Like for me, it's just how I feel when I'm training with that pump is also part of the equation. Like you want to feel good, and I am after that short-term gratification there. But that's why at the start of the week with my strength stuff, I've put my still on high volume strength work, bodybuilding work with bigger rests, because then I don't feel as guilty. It's just probably just a short-term thing because I have this hang up. So until I've kind of got used to it, this is how I've segmented it. And then when I get a bit more comfortable, I might be able to add a bit more rest period in the back end of the week. My main kind of like question in some respect to this is because where I think people might have an issue is the fact that having such a long rest period just means you won't be able to get in as many exercises if you are time poor, which then means you may have to potentially add in an extra day of training to get in some of those extra accessory pieces that you haven't been able to fit in. That saying, like for instance, face pulls or lateral raises, right? You might be able to throw them in on a heavy squat day. So you might be able to do that. Might be then where, like what you mentioned before, that might be a way to get around it. But if your headspace is purely in the squats and you don't want to be then go and do some lateral raises, like, do you know what I mean? You kind of want to have that headspace all in the exercise. So that might mean on an extra day that you then throw in maybe after some cardio or something like that, you have some additional work that you can do there.
Yeah. I think to be clear, it's absolutely not a blanket statement that everybody must rest this long between every set. There's a lot of practical, logistical constraints that people have, and we need to respect. So they're not just doing like 6 sets every half hour. So yeah, finding your personal balance, I think, is important for how to build this in. But I think if you have the option to take more time between sets, you will see a benefit from a mechanical tension, and you'll probably see some strength benefit as well if you were under-resting on strength work at the same time. So yeah, I think that was a really great one. Obviously check out the episode with Casper if you haven't done so already, which is only a couple of episodes I think ago. Cool. Number 2 is from our episode with Adam from ZAAG, and that's that nutrient density has dropped off a cliff. So he gave a great stat about apples, saying that if you ate one apple in the 1950s to try and get the same nutrients from apples today, you'd need to eat 100 of them because they're so much less nutrient dense, basically because we've been over farming and depleting the soil of nutrients. Much of our food nowadays has much less goodness in it per gram. So I think a lot of people might resonate with this in that they feel like they're eating super healthily, but probably don't feel as healthy as they expect or maybe deserve to, considering how strict they might be eating. And I think this goes a long way to explain that, in that you could be eating what on paper is an extremely healthy diet, but actually, if you dug into the nutrient profiles of all the food you're eating and compared them with what they actually are to what they could potentially be if they were from better farms and with more um, rich soil, then you'd probably be in a much better state. And I think this one to me reminded me of what Liam Holmes said from PH Nutrition when he came on in regard to supplements. In that the best supplement for you to take is the one that you're deficient in, which basically says you will feel the most benefit from a supplement if it's plugging a gap that's in your diet. So what that means is obviously try and eat the most nutrient dense food that you can, but the real answer to this problem of poor or low nutrient density is to regularly do your blood work to see where your levels are at, and then you can make an informed decision as to how you plug those gaps by either adding in more foods that contain whatever you're deficient in or looking to supplement to fill those holes.
Yeah, I to be honest, like that stat of the nutrients, like it makes sense because like obviously I don't know what an apple from the 1950s tasted like, but I you do notice a difference in when you're buying, say, like fruit from a farm shop or where you're getting like organic, and like does taste a difference. Like you get Sainsbury's blueberries versus like their organic blueberries, which are just plumper, juicier, they just taste better. So you can just imagine, like obviously the taste isn't necessarily all the nutrients that are missing, but I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, like that stat is massive. 100 apples to give you the nutrients of one from the 1950s. It's like, you know, you can see the quality of our meat is going down. You can see the quality, like eggs. Again, look at the yolks. The fact that you have to buy like enriched yolks, to get decent looking egg yolks. It's like it's mental that, but and unfortunately, it's just the way things are at the moment. Unless you're going to pay over the odds for everything, and even then, it's like it's how much can you, unless you actually tested the food, but like trying to buy higher quality food is going to give you the best bang for buck, but at the same time we are going to need to supplement with some of those things that are missing. And it's again just like, you know, when we supplement, say, with creatine, because we're not necessarily going to be eating enough, say, steak and like fishes that are going to help us get the level of creatine that we need. So it's understanding when we need certain supplements, as Liam said, that to make sure that we're providing our body with the right tools to be able to continue to progress in whatever endeavors we're doing. But yeah, it's crazy.
Test, don't guess. Cool. So the next one was a personal experience one, and I think we had a podcast recently about sports specificity and how great it is, and it just made me laugh doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In one of the warm-ups, we were doing glute bridges, and I thought to myself, I haven't done glute bridges for such a long time because of their limited transfer to the other sports that I play and my life in general. And I definitely didn't miss the fact that I didn't do glute bridges. It's not something that an exercise that I particularly care for. But then, yeah, I was just lying there on the mats laughing, doing these glute bridges, thinking this is actually now super useful, because in the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, having strength and power in that movement is incredibly helpful and helps you be good at the sport. And yeah, there's just a variety of different movement qualities that I think are not unique, but quite they're emphasized a lot more in the martial arts, which we don't necessarily get much of in the gym. And personally, like the things that I've noticed are a huge demand for shoulder stability, because you're always sort of posting on the floor, like lots of plank-like movements, or like resisting somebody trying to take your arm into an arm lock or something like that. Lots of open chain shoulder stability in weird and wonderful positions, which we don't get much replication of in the gym. So I'll quite often come out of like a hard sparring session and be unable to lift my hands over my head because my shoulder's just so pumped and exhausted. And The other thing that's noticeable is closed gripping. Like I've only been doing in the gi, so you're grabbing somebody's jacket, which is, it's tough material, but it's kind of not much more than a towel. So having to grip something that small is again very unusual in a gym. And my grip strength's all right from all the calisthenic stuff, but still, like, it is a very different type of grip
It's
strength.
dynamic strength, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's, yeah, exactly. It's been pulled in all different directions. Like if you grab somebody's gi, they're going to be trying to get your hand off their gi in a lot of situations. So your hand's getting pulled in all different directions. And the last ones that I think I noticed was just having leg strength in super deep ranges. So there's one moment when I got folded up like an accordion. This guy basically was pressing my yeah, literally, that's the only way to describe it. I was folded up and basically into a ball. My knees were around my ears, and my legs were crossed. And I was just acutely aware of the fact that I had absolutely zero strength to push him away. It was, and it basically, imagine doing like a lotus position but on the leg press, and the leg press is all the way up into your face. That was kind of where I was. And that made me just think, those sorts of positions are difficult to recreate in the gym. And the only thing that I could think of that was remotely similar was, when people do the sit to stand without using your hands, where you cross your legs and stand up from that position. That's about the only thing that is relatively normal, which is an expression of strength in that specific position. So yeah, there's just been quite a few fun, interesting discoveries from doing jiu-jitsu that lead me to think, that if you're looking to do strength and conditioning for a specific sport, getting a really good understanding of the demands of that sport will help you to do a better job, because you can do all the deadlifts in the world, but that's not necessarily going to transfer over to the accordion position as well, as if you can get yourself in a more similar position to that, and and put in some work there.
Yeah, I mean, like that is sport specificity, right? That is exactly, you've understood your I'd say compromised positions, your weaknesses, and like, okay, fuck, that's what I need to work on. So rather than just doing glute bridges or hip thrusts or something like that for the sake of them, you're saying, right, this is going to carry over to when I'm on my back and I've got someone on top, I need to push them off with force. And I mean, this is like, I guess it goes, if you train in a quite a generalistic way, like you should really be including, say, like a form like hip thrust, glute bridge, or Russian swing, or something where you're generating force from the hip. So like you can train GPP for these sort of things, but I don't think, like, for instance, that I'm about to add hip thrust back into my training, and purely because I've realized I've done everything coming from basically holding a bar and hinging over, rather than coming from basically placed on my hip and being generating force that way. So I just realized there's a hole that's been in my training for quite a while. So I'm like, I'm just going to plug that gap for a little bit. And I think if you haven't got a sport to necessarily have certain movements for, having a view of your training and saying, okay, cool, what maybe like I have there, what am I missing from my training? Just as a general well-rounded like human, that then say, if I was put into that BJJ position just randomly, I might have some force that I could create from it because I do that. So whereas at this moment in time, I don't. So because I'd have to be trying to grab them and throwing them over my shoulder, because that's how I generally hinge. So it is fascinating, and it's really cool to hear the fact you're talking about glute bridges, and I guess sit-ups as well, right? Because you've got someone's in front of you, you've got to throw yourself up and forward. So it's fascinating, and it's cool because they're not generally known as functional movements. Like, because most, again, it's like, I think you mentioned to me before the podcast, but like, when are you really ever on your back? Whereas in BJJ, when are you really on your front? I guess it's obviously when you're attacking, when you're on top of that. But I'd say when you're trying to generate that force, I guess, of getting someone off you, because you're on your back. So being able to, I don't know enough about it yet, but yeah, it's fascinating to hear you say that.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I think for me, it just goes to show how varied the demands of different sports can be. And this is why it is difficult to do GPP, because there are so many things that could be perceived as gaps. Because if somebody invented a new sport tomorrow, that might have a really wacky demand from the human body, which again isn't really covered. So rather than like necessarily trying to be ready for everything, pick the ones that are most important to you,
Yeah,
and then
100%.
you have less to worry about.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I think in that sense is like, this is only if you know what you're working for. Because, for instance, for me, I don't have a sport that I'm training for. So because I don't have a sport, except for, say, just strength in general, I want to make sure that I always have my foundational movements of, say, because I'm basically a power lifter, so squat, bench, and deadlift. But everything outside of that is me just thinking about what movements am I missing, what haven't I done in a while, just to kind of maybe bring up my main lifts. But then if you put me into a sport of some sort, that would probably differ.
yeah, yeah. Just get ready to get mounted, mate. You're ready.
So
Moving on.
yeah, next one. The almost everyone is overstressed, and we need to take the brakes off. I mean, that was a really cool episode with Vergis. I'm going to give that a go. It was really cool because to hear all what he's been doing over there at Precision Health Gym, to really do the full picture and provide the client with, from the blood work to obviously to the training to the recovery and everything. For me, it's amazing that even though we all know stress is a key issue for most people, because we're all overstressed, that we still do nothing about it. And I mean, it is becoming a lot more looked into, to switch from sympathetic, that fight or flight, into the parasympathetic, that rest and digest. So we're doing more like breath work, we're doing cold and hot exposure, we're doing all these like meditation, mindfulness stuff. So we're talking about it, but it's still on the shelf of woo woo. It's still the people like, do we really need to do that?
Yeah, exactly. I think what I took from that one is that Vergis had a really nice articulation of how stress can be holding us back, in that we're trying to get fitter, we might be trying to chase an aesthetic goal, trying to be healthier, but if stress is occupying a significant portion of your body's capacity to deal with any sort of work, you've only got the rest of that budget left to play with to pursue what you actually want. So rather than, I think the numbers he put on it would be like, rather than pushing ahead with only 70% of your actual capacity, why not free up some of the 30% by managing your stress better, so that you actually have more of your energy budget to apply towards your goal. And so I think as part of their process, they sort of have a rebalancing phase to just look at everything holistically, to see what are the low hanging fruit. Like if you manage your stress well, then sure, just crack on with training and nutrition, sort of go about things more traditionally. But if there are some big red flags in your lifestyle, then actually your effort is better spent on addressing those, to lay foundations to pursue your more typical goals in a little bit of time, and you'll end up actually in a better place sooner than if you don't deal with the big stress red flags early on. So I think for me personally, and probably for a lot of listeners, the practical takeaway is basically to take a step back, have a look at the big overall picture, like where are you actually burning a lot of your energy kind of unnecessarily, and it might be worth taking one step back to take two steps forwards a little bit later on.
Yeah, because I guess if we was to put that into some kind of like training perspective as well, it's like most people know or think about deload weeks as the opportunity to take the foot off the gas because they've pushed their intensity. I know obviously we've discussed deloads before on the podcast and you've used them, but like generally I think most people understand that if you're very consistent with your training and everything's pretty consistent in your life, having opportunities where you take the foot off the gas to let the body recalibrate, let the body get ready for what's about to come in the next block of training. And I think, as he put in the episode as well, and as we know, like, stress is important. That's what training is. That's what a lot of life is, different amount of stress being added to the body. But it's when we've got stresses that are outside of ones we're maybe even taking into consideration. Like, at the end of the day, work stress, I think we all know about work stress, but I think we underestimate how much that work stress is probably taken out of us. And like, that could be like you're in a session and all you've got on your mind is about the meeting that's coming up afterwards, or the shit that you just dealt with before you come to the session. So then it means you're not actually fully present in the session, which then can end up in injury, because then you're just not thinking, you're just moving and go too heavy or whatever. Like, it is amazing the power of stress in a positive and a negative way. So we just need to make sure we're trying to be a little bit more conscious and present in what's going on in our current state, and what can we do to get the most out of our training when we are training, or most out of our recovery when we're trying to recover.
Yeah, I think that work point's a really important one. And that was really made clear to me actually in lockdown, when I was doing less work and I was able to be outside more than I am normally. And I actually recovered way better than I did before and since lockdown, just because I had less overall stress in my life. There's less going on because obviously we were locked down, and my body had more capacity to deal with more training and recover from it well. Whereas now, if I tried to train like I did in lockdown, I know I would just be exhausted all the time because I have more other stresses because I'm busier with work and everything else. And I think for me, that really hammered home the stress from all sources counts the same. So even if you know that one point in your life you could deal with a higher training volume, you probably weren't dealing with the level of stress in your job. Maybe you've just had kids, something like that, and that steals from your energy budget, and you need to respect that, because there's no point living in denial pretending it doesn't count when it physiologically very much does.
Yeah, and I think it can be really easy to think, oh, it doesn't matter if you've got like this short-term goal. But just imagine if you could actually achieve that short-term goal easier just by reducing the stress. And the thing is if you've got a short-term goal, it just means you've planned to do something too late. You needed to give yourself more time. So you're now going to put a load of extra stress on the body to achieve this short-term goal, which is just going to be counterproductive. So if we can think a little bit longer term and think a little bit more for life and for training, yes, you could have intermediate goals in the way of like, I want to get in shape for X. But maybe don't give yourself 6 weeks, maybe give yourself 12 to 18 weeks, something like that. So you give yourself more time so that you can allow the body to essentially just have an easier ride. Because I think we associate suffering with what's needed to achieve something. And if we get something easily, then you're like, I shouldn't have been able to get this. It wasn't that hard. And it's like, no, like, it's like, if we give ourselves the right amount of time and actually expect, like, one of my clients, he's Karam, he's absolutely smashing it at the moment, right? He's on a body composition goal, and he's lost a fuck ton of weight, and mad how different he looked. And I said to him, because we spoke about it at the start of the year, and he's like, before I'm 40, I want to get in some of the best shape I've done. And he's absolutely nailing it. And I was like, how have you been doing it? He goes, well, Fresh Fitness Food, they send me my calories, and I only have a protein shake and a coffee outside of that. And that's all I'm doing, right? So everything else in his life, he's managed his training, he's managed stuff like that. But the deficit that he's in was only a small one. It's just small, but he's just been extremely consistent day in, day out. He's had a couple of ups and downs, but generally really consistent. And if you looked at him now, just like, fuck, how did you do that? And it's always the way, like, how did you do it? I was just consistent a little bit. So he didn't go all in on, say, a massive like 500-600 calorie deficit and just see how long you can hold on for to add on that stress. And it's funny because then now I've come out post competition for myself from the weightlifting comp. I've taken on some of that own advice to myself, and I've just put myself in a smaller deficit, rather than I was going to just try and get it over and done with quickly. But I tried that for a week and I was like, that ain't going to last. I can't. I tried it and I was like, I'm going to do more damage than good. So especially after that episode as well, there's a lot of reflections from that. And I was just like, I'm just going to give myself a smaller deficit, give myself a longer time frame, and just get there when I get there, rather than giving myself, I want to be shredded by July. Because it's like, it doesn't matter whether it's July, because if I keep giving myself a short time frame, that short time will just keep being extended out and out and out. Then I'll be shredded for Christmas, and then I'm going into the new year. I'll wait for New Year, and it's just that same stress. I'm managing the stress that I'm putting on my body by giving myself less stress on the daily.
Yeah, exactly. I think that longer time frame is really, it's one of those things. Everyone's impatient nowadays, but the longer it's again, it sounds so obvious when you say it out loud, but the longer you have to play with, the more likely you are to get there. Like, only in the very short extreme projects is it really unlikely that you'll succeed. If you want to lose a couple of kilos, doing it in a week is going to be quite tough to actually lose a couple of kilos of fat. But if you're going to aim for 6 months, then almost everyone will be like, yeah, it's quite lowball, but you'd almost 100% guarantee achieving that if you're a PT or nutritionist worth your salt. So having a little bit more patience means you don't need to sacrifice other areas of life so much, because if you want to do something really extreme, you're going to have to cut other stresses out of your life, and a lot of those stresses are not optional. Like, you probably can't afford to not work, you probably don't want to not see friends and family and take on stress, like the good stresses that come alongside those. So yeah, make your cost benefit decision and then act accordingly. Right, last one, self-talk in sport. So this one is another personal experience one that's come from playing paddle tennis a lot recently, and sort of reflecting on a lot of the people that I've played with and how they manage themselves on court. And I was playing with a guy out here in Bali, a friend of a friend, and every time he'd hit into the net or hit the ball out, he would go absolutely ballistic, start swearing at himself, calling himself a fucking idiot, for fuck's sake, all this stuff. And he was playing with his brother, and his brother was like, "Come on, mate, you're embarrassing yourself now. Just chill out." I think he like threw his racket into the net at one point, and I was just looking at this with my coach's hat on, just thinking, this guy is out of control, because he's a good player, but I could go into the details of what I would change about his game, but fundamentally, the common pattern I've seen with a lot of people losing their heads like that is that they have a very poor expectations management, in that they go for shots which are really difficult and expect themselves to make them. And then when they don't, they're really upset about it. So they're then criticizing themselves for being bad when they're actually holding themselves to an incredibly unrealistic standard. And we've referenced this book before, The Inner Game of Tennis, and it's fantastic for articulating the self-management in sport, where there's kind of two sides to your brain. To oversimplify it massively, you've kind of got your conscious and subconscious, and the way the author advises managing them is almost that your conscious is the parent and your subconscious is the child. And if you think about the child is hitting most of the shots, because any good movement is subconscious. You're not very conscious of all the joint motions and muscle contractions involved in a paddle tennis shot. So if that's the case and the subconscious has made a mistake, if you were coaching an 8-year-old child, you would not lambast them with criticism and say they're shit and be like, for fuck's sake, why did you do that? Obviously not. But that's the conversation a lot of people are having internally or with themselves in their own head. And if you think about that 8-year-old, do you think that 8-year-old is going to start playing better having been bollocked like that? Of course not. Their head's going to go down. They're going to tighten up. They're going to not be as fluid with their shots, which actually negatively impacts their performance. And I think particularly at an amateur level, but you see it throughout all the way to like Olympic level sports, people have this really unhelpful self-talk, because I think there's a variety of different reasons why people speak like that. I think some people want to give the impression that they expect to hit every amazing shot. Like the guys who shoot from 40 yards in football and then are fuming that it didn't go in. But I think the lesson for me was that, you've got to just be a lot more realistic with your expectations and have a much more encouraging and nurturing relationship with your subconscious to draw the best out of yourself. And I think we've talked about paddle tennis a lot, but one of the reasons I wanted to bring up on the podcast is the same is true in the gym. You see a lot of people, particularly in high skill stuff like Olympic weightlifting, people will miss a lift and just then go into an absolute funk, and then there's almost no chance of them making it, even if the way they missed it suggests that they could make it if they try again. But because their confidence goes down because they've criticized themselves, they're actually less likely to make it, compared to have a look at the tape, be like, oh, that was close, I think you can get that next time. Imagine if your parent or your coach said that to you. Your mindset stepping over the bar for the second time is going to be worlds apart compared to, oh, you're fucking weak, or why are you so shit, that was all over the place. And some people do say that to themselves in the gym, and I think there's easy wins to catch yourself in those moments and reframe the narrative.
Yeah, I think talking from a gym experience, I've actively felt, because I wouldn't say I'm a negative self-talker when I'm in the gym, but when it has come to weightlifting, I think the frustration can come out, and I know I've actively oh fuck's sake, like that, and then I'm just like, and then I just take a deep breath and I'm like, okay, what was it? And I analyze, and this is where it's like, I guess what you're saying, how I've taken this is, it's not necessarily the fact that you're constantly talking yourself down, but if you do talk yourself down, you have to bring yourself back up. And it's, I'd say, for me, it's like, if I've done something wrong, I get a little bit frustrated. It's the shit sandwich, right? You get a little bit frustrated, and then I'm like, right, what can I do better now? And then I try and learn from it. I make it an experience that I can take something from, rather than me just continually belittling myself. And I mean, I know, and I took it personally, not that you would know, but I can imagine myself taking a 40-yard screamer shot, knowing that I'm not going to get in, and I'll be annoyed. Like, oh, how did I not get it? Of course I'm not going to get it in. I'm nowhere near good enough to get that in. But it's the type of thing I could imagine myself doing. But it's funny, because then when I was in prepping for my powerlifting competition, I think because I felt so at home with the movements and I felt so confident in what I was doing, it's just the execution needed to be executed essentially correctly, that I only spoke to myself positively about it. Because then when I got to the competition day, even though I'd just come out of an illness, I wasn't feeling great, but I went into the competition like, okay, I've done all the prep I needed to. I was talking to myself very positive, the glass half full approach. I was saying, rather than being half empty and saying, oh, I've been ill and stuff like that, talking about all those negatives and giving myself justification and reasoning to why maybe I didn't achieve, I actually spoke to myself the other way and said, right, okay, cool. I've done loads of prep for this. I'm ready to hit this. I'm going to see how this lift feels. I'm going to film it so I can actually take a proper look at it, and subjectively and say, right, and objectively look at it in both ways and say, okay, I'm ready to go up to this weight and so forth. And then obviously when I then went for the 300 deadlift, I went for my first attempt and I was like, okay, this is cool. I feel good. And I went into it saying, I'm going to hit this. It is that positive self-talk that I said, I was already there. I was there to do one job and I was there to lift that weight. So I kept telling myself, I didn't think, maybe if I don't get it, or I got a third attempt. I was like, no, I'm going to do it on my second attempt, and that's the attempt I'm going to do it. So it's the whole self-talk thing. I often talk to quite a few clients about this, and it's just like, it happens so often that one of my clients who's injured at the moment, and she was writing down all the exercises she couldn't do. And I was like, how about write down all the exercises you can do? Just that you're doing the same thing. You're going to be analyzing it in the same way, but just writing down the positive ones. Why write down the negatives? Because it's going to frame it in a different way. So if you can frame it in a more positive, cool, I can do this. And then, oh, actually, I could do that one. And it feels, so then you're adding to your list. So rather than saying all these negative, it's how we frame is just in how we're going to continue into life outside of sport as well. And that's something that's so key, because the self-talk in sport is that initial reaction to a spur of the moment thing. It's just like you let your inner beast out, just like fuck, and then it's like chill, just chill. And it is fascinating because I remember what was that tennis player, the one that used to go known for going absolutely mental.
John McEnroe.
Yeah, he was fascinating to watch him. And then you watch someone like Andy Murray, like when he goes and gets annoyed, just like I don't know. For me, when Andy Murray gets on, I'm just like, calm down, mate. But John McEnroe used to be entertaining to watch when he used to get angry.
One of my mates has a saying about him is that nobody else in the world plays better when they're angry except John McEnroe, and that's in my experience that's pretty true as well. When you get absolutely ballistic, especially in a skills sport, being like really hot-headed doesn't really help. Like if it's more of like a suffer sport, like some sort of endurance racing, or where you really need to, it's just pure grit rather than focus and high skill execution, then getting angry can help. But by and large, being unbalanced, I don't think helps with the execution side of things.
Well, I think the difference between powerlifting and weightlifting. That's the thing. If I went into weightlifting with a more hot-headed mindset, I had to go in walking up to the bar in a much clearer mind to know that I just had to let it flow rather than get to the bar. Even though I'm not like that as a lifter in general, but like to be fair, when I went for my 300, I did have a little before I stepped onto the platform. But I'm not an aggressive person. But for me, that is a huge thing that I found weightlifting. That, and when I missed it, I was just like rather than you're shit, like fuck. Because it's again, I then still had a whole load of other lifts to do, and it's fascinating. It really is. So I think the main takeaways for today have to be: if you're trying to get bigger, rest more. I think that was a massive one that we've both taken on board ourselves, and I'm taking it on board a little less, but I'm going to try a little bit more each time. I guess look for the most nutrient dense foods you can find. So it's going to be getting the higher quality stuff, since there is such a difference from back in the day to now. But also then utilizing supplements that either plug in holes that you already know are missing, or grab yourself some ZAAG. Use the code DISCLUNGE50 for the first 25 people, or DISCLUNGE20 for going forward discount code. Of course, Disc Lift. That's it. Obviously, reviewing your sporting demands. I love this takeaway, because for me, imagining you now doing glute bridges and sit-ups, calling them functional, and they are. That's the beauty of this. And yeah, I love that. So making sure that you're optimizing exercises for your training and how to actually get the most out of them. Of course, finding ways to de-stress so that you can stay below your threshold overall and get more out of the work that you're putting in. I think that's key. So finding ways to de-stress to get more out of your work. And lastly, your self-talk, just like we spoke about there. I love that saying of talk to yourself like an 8-year-old. That I would never shout down to my daughter the way I talk to myself. So I know that's an easy way for me to just think about. And it's the same as like when I say, like when I'm talking to clients about things that I probably would recommend they wouldn't do, yet I think I should do them. I'm like, no, you do exactly what you're telling the clients to do. So I thought that was that was a really nice review. And if you did like this, guys, definitely drop us a message and let us know if you like episodes like this, because just as you suggested this episode, it was like that'd be quite cool to do when we have had a bunch of guests on, to kind of pull out our learnings from them, because we have the opportunity to talk to so many cool people and we've learned so much from them, and it'd be quite nice to maybe pull some of those bits out. But as always, thank you for listening. We really do appreciate each and every week. Please share with anyone that you think might enjoy it. Don't forget to tag us on Instagram at lunge.lift, and also head over to YouTube, subscribe, like, share, and all that good stuff. If you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, it would help us grow massively. And as always, massive thank you to our show sponsors, wit-fitness.com, for all of your WIT kit. Go over and use the code LL15 to save for yourself 15% off your purchase. And you can also head over to Hytro for your blood flow restriction apparel and use code LL20 for 20% off. Right. Have a wonderful day, and we'll speak to you next week.
Thanks, guys.